yesterday. So we got to the amendments, right? So let's do this real quick. We're going to do these fast. Oh, where you get your notes, and I'll tell you why this is happening right now. Because of the coronavirus, did I tell you about the global supply chains? The global supply chains for goods are being cut off right now. And what's happened is also people are realizing, oh no, we're running out of key components we're going to produce. And it's just hitting right now. And almost certainly that means the potential for an economic crash. So have fun tonight. No, because it won't be, it probably won't be that bad. But then again, pandemics are terrifying. So let's see where this goes. My nephew's in Milan. I have a nephew in Berlin and a nephew in Milan. And so, it's a little scary because now they're basically on lockdown in Milan, Italy, because of this. So the Clayton Antitrust Act. This would strengthen the Sherman Antitrust Act. That's what the Clayton Antitrust Act did. Gave a little bit more power, but it's still a law today, but still not enough. It still has too many confusing parts, and the Sherman Antitrust Act is not really used today. Another big one is the FTC. The Federal Trade Act created the Federal Trade Commission. And this commission looks into activities by monopolies, aka illegal restraints of trade. So it keeps companies from doing practices that monopolies would use to try to dominate the market, or can even stop companies from forming monopolies. So for example, when Sprint and T-Mobile are in the process of merging, they had to go to the FTC. And the FTC said monopolies, actually, there's no incentive for monopolies to raise prices, and therefore they allowed them to merge. This happened last week. And that is mind-boggling because that's the only incentive for monopolies. So we don't care about monopolies today. But that's the FTC. Another one, the Keaton-Owens Act. And that would try a number of worker safety laws, but the most impactful would be to try to limit, not totally, but limit child labor. Child labor, if you allow for little kids to work in the workplace, that drops wages for adults. But a very conservative Supreme Court ruled this unconstitutional. They said it violated the principles of contracts. Companies make contracts with workers, even kids. Why can't kids sign contracts? It's actually a pretty amazing ruling. That would be overturned in 39. But there's always court cases winding their way back, and who knows? We're kind of back to this era of Supreme Court. Those are three big ones, but one of the most important ones would be the Federal Reserve Act. This would create a national bank, and this was done in 1913. The 1907 panic convinced people they need some kind of system to control finances, but also be able to pump money into banks before they collapse. So they created a Federal Reserve System with 12 districts within the United States. Anybody know what district the United States is in? That's in the United States? The only part that matters for the United States is Montana. So anybody know what district Montana is in? Yes. No, what? But what? They actually name it after where the bank's at. Yeah, we're in the Minneapolis area. If you go downtown, right across from Women's Park, right across from Pacific Center, the Federal Reserve Bank is the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. And it is like a big fortified town. Has anyone been to the Federal Reserve Bank? Did you go there for class or on anything else, field trip? Did you get a little bag of shredded up money? Yeah, you're in that Federal Reserve System. That's how if you're in the system that allows you access to Federal Reserve notes, they're the one who issues currency. If you ever look at dollars today, it says Federal Reserve note, because it's in the Federal Reserve System. And that allows the bank to regulate. They regulate the banks. And this puts restrictions about reserves banks must have, things like that. We'll talk more about that when we get to the Great Depression. But the Federal Reserve Board then administers this system, and these are appointed by the president, approved by the Senate for a 6-year term, and they have immense power. When the Federal Reserve votes, they decide, basically it's called the federal funds rate, but that decides interest rates. Therefore, they can control the money supply. If they want to tighten the money supply, they raise interest rates and make it harder for banks to loan money to each other. That raises interest rates for regular loans. Or the reverse. They want more money in circulation, they lower interest rates. So in bad economic times, they lower the rates. In good economic times, where they think it might be, the term they literally use is overheating before a bubble, they raise interest rates. And this gives them huge amounts of power. The head of the Federal Reserve, a fairly conservative economist by the name of Jamie Powell, when he testifies in front of the Congress, which he does once a month, sometimes more, people really listen, because he's the one who talks about, he would say, give hints on whether or not they're going to raise or lower interest rates. And the last time he was there, he said, the economy on the surface is doing well, but there's a lot of problems underneath. And so they were considering lowering it. And a lot of people suspect they were worried about the coronavirus 2 weeks ago. I would not be surprised if they have an emergency meeting to lower rates. The problem is rates are already so low, there's not a lot of room to go. Europe is negative interest rates. Don't even try to figure out how that's done. It's really, yeah.
Is the person who is the head of the board, is that
Jimmy Powell, yeah.
Is he like a politician, or is he like knowledgeable in this field? Do you know what I mean?
They're appointed by the president. And so the president can appoint anybody the president wants. But normally they're economists.
Okay.
And he's an economist. President Obama's last appointee was Janet Yellen, and she was the first woman ever appointed. And she was a moderate liberal economist, which I thought was more conservative.
So they know what they're talking about.
Technically.
Okay.
They royally screwed up before the 2008 crash. So just because someone is an expert with the training doesn't make it right. You know, it's like anything else in this world. Except in here, correct? Good. So with that, oh, this is from the 1920s. There's a lot of things about the bank having too much power. They always have pictures of the octopus. You know, that never goes away. One more thing. Wilson was the most racist president, one of the most racist presidents in American history. He desegregated the government. So here are a couple national parks with, these are picnic areas. Well, this is from the late 1950s. The brand new National Park Service created under Roosevelt for Negro areas. This is an outhouse in Shenandoah Park. This is the 1920s for white women. Okay, it's pretty rustic. It was the 1920s, and it is an outhouse. But he would be the president to segregate the brand new Lincoln Memorial. And the irony of that should just be overwhelming, shouldn't it? And so, this is an era where there was a real movement in civil rights. This desire to, now, this is to get rights back that African Americans fought so hard for. Remember, 100,000 African American soldiers fought in the Civil War. 1 out of 10, I meant to say, fought in the Civil War of the entire Union Army, the fight for citizenship and rights. They got those rights, and then they were taken away. Once again, that's gets back to that principle. People think history is kind of this progression of what you believe in equal rights, what is good, and like always getting better. No, it goes up and down, and sometimes it takes 2 steps forward, and sometimes even 3 steps back. So this is the fight for rights that they should already have had and were taken away. And there were 2 approaches. One personified by this man, Booker T. Washington. And Washington looked at it as like, all right, Jim Crow laws, voting rights, there's nothing we can do. If we fight against those, we'll lose. What we need to do, and he called it his Atlanta plan. He gave a talk in Atlanta called the Atlanta Conference, where African-American leaders met. But economics over equality. We have to look for better jobs, business opportunities, skills. That is the way to go. And not worry about rights. So keep the basic system, and down the road, that can change. But let's right now just fight with the economic, or fight for a slightly better or bigger piece of the pie. A lot of people looked at that and thought that is exactly the wrong way to go. In fact, it's playing into the racist hands. Nobody with a greater voice than W.B. or Webb Du Bois, right here. Okay, it's Americanized, it's probably Du Bois, but it's the United States, Du Bois. And he looked at it as you can't have economic equality without equal rights. And that means the right to vote and the right to participate in daily activities of commerce, which Jim Crow denies, and other segregation that wasn't necessarily the law, but the way that it was done in the North. The government makes the rules, and therefore we must have an active role in government, and the only way is through equal rights. So we have to fight for our rights. Just like we fought in the Civil War, he saw himself as the successor to Frederick Douglass. His book on Reconstruction is still one of the greatest histories ever written on Reconstruction. And he would help be very instrumental in starting the NAACP. Now, this acronym is going to become so synonymous with the fight for equal rights. As long as you know the acronym, you're good. But does anyone know what it means? Association. If you think African Americans, which that term wasn't even used yet. Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Yeah. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But the NAACP would be a tireless fighter for equal rights. And they did it, they realized we have to build step by step. So one of their first big initiatives was to do everything they could to stop lynching, the epidemic of lynching all over the South. But it would be the NAACP, that would be through their lawsuits that would bring about Brown versus Board of Education, that would desegregate the schools. And they would be the leaders in the fight for the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. And it all started from W.B. Du Bois to white progressives personified by Teddy Roosevelt. Which one would be invited to eat with Teddy Roosevelt at the White House, but have to go in through the back door? Which one of these two? Washington. Yeah, Washington. Washington represented the lesser threat. To people like Roosevelt, he was a dangerous radical. And they would say things like, have patience, like Booker T. Washington, down the road. Of course, it's always easy for somebody who already has these rights or enjoy that privilege to tell somebody else, have patience. Don't complain. It bothers me. So with that, that is what we're coming up to just as World War I began. And World War I, in fact, the last of these progressive reforms will be at the end of World War I. So let's go ahead and do it. World War I. And you see this called the Great War, and the very tragic name, the war to end all wars, because nobody could believe this insanity could happen again. And this, well, we're still living in the shadow of World War I. Am I filming this? I am filming. We are very much in the shadow. The world we have today was created out of World War I. This is a climatic event in world history. It's one of those things where a hinge moment, where everything would be different after World War I. And so World War II might have had a greater scope. It was certainly more horrific in the number of people killed, wounded, or changed forever. But World War I was, in many ways, the cause of that. And the problems that started and led to World War I and came out of World War I still have not been resolved. So many of the issues in Europe today, you see right out of World War I. The Middle East, it's all World War I. All the problems of the Middle East, you can have directly related to World War I. And so many leading directly to the Pacific War and poor Russia. So I was walking over, this was third period, and I noticed this very creepy finger puppet of a shirtless Putin. And that reminded me about the hell that Russia has gone through from World War I to this day. It was the first industrial war. It was a slaughter like no one had ever seen or imagined. The cost was incomprehensible, and I think still is, because most people just don't realize how awful it was. And this is a good picture showing what army? These are Germans, And they have so many of the things that would become symbols, synonymous with the war. First off, the first helmets. But also, you know, it's machine guns. And what are they wearing? The gas mask. And yes, this is the real deal, a World War I German helmet. It actually helps with shrapnel. It will help. A heck of a lot better than nothing. But no, it won't stop a bullet. That's a British. But the Americans did the same thing. You can see what their fear was. And I'll pass it around when we get to a little bit more, but shrapnel from above, that's why it has this. Shells explode, protect that way. By World War II, the Americans went away from this. The British kept them all for World War II. All helmets today copy the German helmet. The US helmet today is just a copy of that. Improved, better, lighter. But another picture, and this one's pretty stark. I like this one, wearing the gas mask, and what do you know about the horses? That's their gas mask. World War I would chew horses up. Absolutely chew it. Chew them up. In fact, kind of made my hometown, Miles City, because there's so many wild horses through there to go die in the front. So, this war, they knew it was coming. There was this arms race, this buildup. They had fought so many wars. In fact, that's why sometimes you see this called the European Civil War. And after 1 and 2, it's part of the reason why Europeans are like, we've had enough of this. Of course, that's also why it's so terrifying that fascism, which developed out of World War I, is on the rise. They would draw these maps of caricatures, and there's hundreds of these. And some are kind of funny, some are kind of creepy. I like this one for lots of reasons. I think this Italy makes me laugh. And the bayonet in the nose of Russia, that's from Germany. And Britain is just creepy. I don't know what France is. Belgium is just a pistol. And you see what two countries were looked down upon by the Germans. But by a lot of Europe too. You notice most of them are all men, for the most part. Serbia's a pig. Montenegro's a maggot. Part of that's anti-Slavic bias, but part of it, Serbia was just, that was a rough place. You know, when their king was murdered in 1911 by throwing him out a window onto an iron fence. And they let him on, he died slowly on that fence as they danced around and celebrated. Other kings in Europe were unamused by that. Moving on, let's get to the factors that led to war. We got to do a little bit of European history, but all kind of relate to the United States. But more importantly, the role of the United States in this world will change forever. The richest country in the world and the fastest growing industrial country in the world would destroy themselves in this war. So the United States is going to grow relative to all the rest. So the first one we've already talked about, the impact of industrialization. And not only did it create more wealth and new products and new innovation and the appearance of this growing and dynamic society, it also led to huge inequalities. And I like that picture of Manchester right there. That's Manchester, England. And with the coal smoke from the mills, just this stark, dirty town. And you had this situation where some of the wealthiest people in the world and the monarchs who were getting richer and the leaders were getting richer than ever before. And people seeing that and saying, why can't I have a piece of that? Not just of the wealth and the products, but also the power. I want a voice in government. That's why you have the growing socialist or communist movement. And who was assassinating people all over the world? Bomb-throwing anarchists. So you had all of these directly related from this industrialization. This dramatic change. One of my favorite stories is in 1913. In Berlin, they had over 1 million people come out to celebrate the Kaiser, their emperor's birthday. This big nationalistic show of pride, and yay, Germany. 2 weeks later, on May Day, over 1 million people came out for socialism and socialist revolution. That's in Germany. That should give you an idea how dynamic and scary it was. There was a feeling that revolution was going to happen, that those on the bottom cannot take it that much longer. They will fight back, and all they talked about was the apocalypse. Here are a couple works of art by the great German artist Friedrich Meider, and there were books about this, books about war, songs about war and fear of war. There's war preparation. His art, I saw an exhibit of his work, and it was, wow, was it good. Flat pictures on the screen from copies don't really give you an idea how just dramatic. And this is a city on fire, and this is a destruction of a city. All you know is fire from the sky and people running from it. It's this vision of the apocalypse. And why that's important is if you have this vision of the apocalypse, like it's going to happen, then you're going to get a lot of people thinking, let's just get it over with. It's going to happen. Let's just do it. And let's do it now where we can win, which is a pretty scary attitude. It's no coincidence that the German artists in Germany would be the most apt to that. If you get a chance, Meider's work, I like that era of art, Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Two, while this is going on, with dynamic change and a whole new world being created with all these different technologies, you still have 17th century monarchs. And they still think they're ruling, and it's 1650. And many of them think they are not just, or they are speaking for God, not just getting their power from God. And so old versus new. And so this is a good picture to show one of the problems these monarchies have. That's Queen Victoria. That's her silver jamboree. Her 60th year on the throne. Or 50th year on the throne. There she is right here. And these are all members of her family. And all of them are in the royal families of all over Europe. Close relatives, cousins, nieces, nephews, all over. So here's her son, the Prince of Wales, soon to be Edward VII. He died very young. And her grandson would become king. Her cousin, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, who married her niece, who was German. I know, it's pretty wild, isn't it? These are all nieces or and daughters and etc. who are married to royalty all over Europe. This is probably the most famous. Her nephew, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the Emperor of Germany. They're all related and all connected. And so you have all this inbreeding, and yes, that's why there is a definite tendency to look like horses in that picture. But also, Queen Victoria is a carrier of a little disease too. Anyone know? Yeah.
Hemophilia.
Hemophilia. Hemophilia, what is that?
Blood happens a lot.
Yeah, your blood can't clot. A horrific disease, especially then, where there was literally nothing they could do. But you have all these monarchs who are, well, they're not, by definition, they're not going to be the sharpest people if they're all going to be inbred, all going to be isolated. And whoever your king is, whoever your queen is, you're stuck with them. That's just by luck of birth, who you either got as good or bad. That's who you get. And their number one job in life is to have an heir and keep the dynasty going. And they're all in charge. The best example would be Kaiser Wilhelm II. The Kaiser of Germany became Kaiser at a very young man. He was totally ill-prepared. His father, whom he hated, that's the norm amongst monarchs. His father, when he died, his father died very young and put him in at 21. He was seen as emotionally unstable. He was actually really intelligent, but so insecure, it's hard to even grasp. And I think you can see why he's insecure from this picture taken a few years before World War I. You see it. There he is. Do you see it? What's wrong with him? When he was born, he was a breech birth. So they had to go in and get him out. They had to twist him. Awful. I can't even imagine how terrible that would have been, especially this is 1860. So his mom survived. They died a lot in that. But his left shoulder dislocated. He's a baby, he had no idea. And so it never grew properly. And so he had a withered left arm that was a about 2/3 the size, and his hands, fingers, these tiny little fingers that he couldn't even make a fist. All I could do was kind of like that. His whole life he had this withered arm. So you see pictures of him with his arm bent, like usually holding something to kind of disguise it. His uniform would be tailored. But the thing is, he is the emperor. He would be the very young emperor of a new German empire. And the emperor is supposed to be a warlord. How can he be a warlord with a withered left arm? And so he was treated as a little boy that this was a weakness. And they literally tried to beat that out of him. The stories about him trying to ride a horse are just horrific. You can imagine how difficult it would be, especially as a small boy riding a large horse. And he would fall off, and they would punish and beat him and mock him. And his whole life, he tried to compensate for this. So when he became emperor, he was somebody who wanted to prove that he was not going to be stopped by this. Who is going to laugh at a man with a withered arm if he's the emperor of a country with the strongest army in the world? That is an unsafe recipe. That is a recipe for disaster. He would work on his right arm to make it stronger. And so how would he do this? Chopping wood. He would chop one arm with an axe until his arm got incredibly powerful. So one arm was really strong. So he would do things like shake hands with people. This gives you an idea what kind of person he was. He's emperor of Germany, who is the fastest growing economy in the world and the strongest army in the world. And this is what he would do. He would shake hands with people, and just kind of random. And he would just start squeezing it till they would start crying out in pain and going to a knee. Sometimes he would break knuckles. And then he would just hold them there, like grimacing, and they can't do anything because he's the Kaiser. By the way, what does Kaiser mean? It means emperor, but Caesar. Kaiser, Caesar. And they'd be like, ah, and he'd be holding it, having a conversation. Sometimes he would have big rings on, he'd turn them inside so he could rip their hands apart as he did it. Kind of wrench him like that. That's unstable. And yet he was in charge of the German army. Their constitutional monarchy had that. The only ally of Germany was Austria. And their emperor, Kaiser Franz Joseph, don't worry about Archduke Karl. I couldn't remember his name, so I typed it in so I would never forget his name again. You don't need to know it. It was just bugging me. He had been emperor since 1848 of the vast Austrian Empire. And here is this fossil who's doing everything he can to try to control this vast empire. And if you look at this map right here, look how big Austria is. It's huge. And there are all these different ethnic groups that want their own independent country, and he is still acting like it's 1840. He was on the throne for 66 years when the war began. His wife was assassinated by anarchists. And so you have this unstable man and this fossil who will do anything he can to keep that empire together. And that would be the recipe for war. Facing them, the biggest country in the world, Russia. And their Tsar, Nicholas II, was totally ill-prepared for being the leader. In fact, he was an autocrat. He had total control of Russia. All the courts, the legislature was him. He controlled the army. He was everything. And he was not a very bright man. He was indecisive. He wept as a young man when he found out he was going to be emperor. He didn't like his father either, but he knew he was not ready. He knew, didn't want it, but to his point of view, God made me emperor. He'd be emperor during the disastrous Russo-Japanese War. Tsar means emperor, Caesar, Tsar. And have you ever seen TSAR for Tsar? It means the same thing. It's just different translations. Yeah?
Is the person you're talking about Rasputin or Nicholas?
Tsar Nicholas II. And as he became emperor, his wife Alexandria, the Tsarina, that's Queen Victoria's niece, and she's German. You think having a German prince, German Tsarina during World War I might be a problem when you're fighting Germany? It'd be a problem in Britain. Their dynasty's name is German. They'd have to change the name during the war. to Windsor, their Saxe-Coburg. And he didn't have a son, an heir, for a long time. He had 4 daughters. And then finally had a son, Nikolai. And what was his problem? Actually, no, they had gone on really well. It was one of those weird exceptions, but then again, maybe that's why he was the last Tsar. He had hemophilia. His great aunt was Queen Victoria. And hemophilia, what happens? Cuts bad. Cuts bad. What's really bad is a bruise. Internal bleeding, it begins to bleed, and it swells, cuts off blood vessels, cuts off nerves. But the big thing is, I guess, I mean, that could kill you. But as I understand it, the pain is beyond comprehension. How bad that hurts. And so just a little bruise could kill you. Just kill them. And so what do parents of hemophiliacs do? First period, someone came up with a great analogy. She said, wrap them in bubble wrap. And so what if little children, when they're hemophiliacs, they can't play, they can't do all those things because that causes bruises. So what do they want to do? He would do like a lot of hemophiliacs, take incredible risks. He's so desperate to play and do things he couldn't do. So they'd find things that would put him on the ledge of the summer palace. He'd be on the roof running around because he would escape his handler, and then fall off and get a bruise. Well, Rasputin was a Russian priest. It's complex. He was from Siberia, and somehow he got the rumor as being a healer. The Tsarina brought him in, and it appeared as though his influence helped calm him. Now, actually, it turned out Nikolai was scared to death of him, but Rasputin was brought in, and soon he is almost like part of the family, and he's giving not only just advice about Nikolai, but advice about like policy. He's advising the royal family, but nobody knows why he's there because they keep Nikolai's hemophilia secret. And so people begin to wonder, why is the emperor, who there's kind of a whispering thing, he's weak. Why would he bring this man in who at night would go out in St. Petersburg and drink and eat more than anybody? He would act as almost like a lech, and they would have like almost a harem of aristocratic women who thought he gave some kind of mystic power, follow him around. And had this horrible reputation at night, and then the Tsar and the Tsarina listened to him. The point is, when you have an absolute monarch, you're stuck with what you get. And that is the situation there. He was a simple man who should never have been monarch. And speaking of creepy inbreeding, that's Nicholas II, and that's King George V of England. They're cousins. Isn't that weird? So with that, imperialism. We've talked about imperialism, that's empire for profit. But now you have all these countries in competition for empire. And it's not just worldwide, as they would have either economic imperialism or worldwide imperialism all over. I mean, look at the Russian Empire and all the areas they conquered. But in Europe, 3 great empires were fighting for Central Europe: Austria, Germany, and Russia. Africa is the best example, though, of imperialism, because remember what Washington said when he warned in his farewell address, these foreign entanglements, empire leads to war, because you're fighting for empire. And what do you need? A big military, secret police, secret governments, all those things that lead to war and tyranny. Look at Africa. 1879, there were very few colonies. By 1914, only 2 places in Africa were not colonized. You might remember Liberia from the American Colonization Society. Even though that was kind of a colony, and Ethiopia fought off the Italians, were able to maintain independence. Other than that, blue, that's French. The reddish, that's English. The green, there's 2 different greens. German, Portugal, even Belgium had the Congo, a horrific colony, and what they would do there. But all these countries are fighting these jealousies, and these would lead to these empires in Europe all in competition. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, all empires, all fighting for profit, all building up their military, waiting for, as it would turn out, something to blow up. And that, what would do it would be nationalism. We've talked about nationalism before after the War of 1812, and remember, that's intense devotion for your country. Why do you love your country? Because it's your country. And, okay, the United States has a different point of view. You can really see what this means here, this national identity. You know, we're French. We speak French. That is our country. We are great. Or Britain or Germany. But look at Central and Eastern Europe. All those different colors are different ethnic groups. And more nationalism is going to mean also, what about political independence for our group? We want to be independent too, just like the United States would during the Revolutionary War. On national identity. That's language, or like in Bosnia, it's going to be Slavs who are also Christian and Muslim. All this area was under Turkish control, the Ottoman Empire. And so they're in this interesting hodgepodge of group. And there's a significant number of Sunni Muslims there, which makes sense if they're under the Islamic Muslim state. But they want their own states. And nowhere is this bigger, no group, than the Slavs. The Slavs, especially in Central and the Baltic Peninsula, they call Pan-Slavism, which means another way of saying Slavic nationalism, a Slavic state. And the Austro-Hungarian or Austria-Hungary, all this area right here, see, this massive place, that's Austria. And all those different colors are major ethnic national groups. So the red are Germans, so the Austrians are Germans, and they're a minority when it's still everyone called them Austria for the most part. Hungary, because it's a dual monarchy, they're Hungarian. They're not Slavs. Everybody else, for the most part, okay, Czechs are different, but we have Poles, Ukrainians, Slavs, and they want independence. So, good place to stop. Tomorrow we have a test, so we'll be a little bit of an assignment. Is anyone in the choir, course? Okay. Few of the classes. Let's all be in fourth period. Must be the way the schedule's worked out. Now in special topics, we're going to start a cult. You can't join a cult. Now we want it.
They're planning on running.
You want to run it because they just steal my Christian culture. Yeah.
So it was like the
NAACP.
So, my English teacher, we wrote a thing that was talking about like the African American community, and she didn't like it when I wrote colors in it. Like she said that was like that colored people didn't like to be called colored people. Is that true? Because like
It's very complex. Colored people became kind of a racial slur in the 50s. And so colored people became a slur for African Americans. And that's why it's such an important thing. In fact, that's why black became a big thing. We're black. We're not just. And so that's what. And it can be a little bit confusing because as we have a country that's increasingly becoming more people not of European descent, they start hiding one of the majority of the people of European descent, some people of color. But that's not the
test
same.
today. Test today.
And that could be a fine line.
I just wasn't sure, like when she told me to change that, I did not write that.
And I know and you did not, I mean, obviously you didn't mean, but that, it became more of a slur, and fortunately that's gone away, but yeah. The big thing was just but it also shows you how things changed, because it wasn't insulting in 1906, but in the 1950s it was.
Is it still insulting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not, there's obviously worse stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
Test today? Did I say test today or tomorrow?
I said tomorrow, don't I test some shit.
So because you were like, you left it in.
I thought I had the test today.
Well, but like, why would I do it on a shortened period, you know?
You guys are smarter than other
I
people.
need to excel, but use time wise. I'm gonna